Well, this morning I feel very honored and I certainly privileged to be able to have an opportunity to sit down with Beverly Whisnant, longtime member of Wake Forest Baptist Church. And Beverly, good morning.
Good morning, Joe.
Man, we have a beautiful morning here. It's mid-August, mid to late August, and just a great time to be able to sit down and have a conversation and catch up with you and learn a little bit about your story this morning. So thank you in advance for being able to being willing to sit down and have this conversation this morning.
Well, I've never had a good conversation with you, and conversations are rare, so thank you for asking me.
You know, it is true. I mean, in our church, we're all so busy, and Sunday morning just doesn't give us time to really get deep and to learn about each other. And so this is exciting for me personally, but also for those who will be listening to this to get to know a little bit more about some of our church members and particularly special people like you, Beverly. So anyway, I'm looking forward to our time together. Why don't we just start by maybe tell us a little bit about where it all started for you and maybe talk about your journey that led you to Wake Forest Baptist Church eventually, and any of the really important events and things in your life up until that point that you might want to share with us.
Well, as we've said, I've told you I've had three lives. So, and it's been a long time, so I'll try to be succinct. When you look back, there are things that stand out, but then you get into the details and it would take forever. But I was born in Athens, Georgia, 1936, right in the middle of the Depression, in a place that was all about stories. We told stories. Everybody liked stories. And my Civil War great-grandfather died in January 1936. I was born in December 1936. Okay, you can be sure that that part of our history experienced in that state had not been forgotten. And it's odd now, of course, to see kind of a turnaround in thinking, but Athens is a university town, sort of like Georgia's Chapel Hill. And I found out through some research quite accidentally that one of my way back 7 generations uncles was one of the first 8 graduates at the university in 1804. I had no idea, but wow. That's how far back we go before the Revolutionary War. And it really is red clay on my heels because I had such a happy childhood. Shall I go on?
Sure.
With that? Well, for the first 13 years of my life, it was between Athens and Atlanta. One of my mother's cousins brought her 2 letters when she had me in the hospital. One written in 1842, one in 1843, and he brought them to her because she named me Virginia Beverly. And that was the name of the person who wrote those letters to her sister, begging her to come. And they're full of, things about their life at that time. But from the time I was little, I knew about that. And then when World War II came along, and my mother and her little girls went back to the farm that my Civil War grandfather had built the house to be, because my dad was gone about 5 years. I don't remember exactly. And I went to kindergarten in Atlanta, but then there we were back in that old house. And there were 10 people, my grandparents, my great-grandmother, my twin uncles, and my mother's sister came back. You just had to go where you could be safe in those days. So it was full of just a lot of love and happiness. But I know they struggled coming out of the Depression and then straight into World War II. But it was pretty easy up to then, a very safe, we lived in a magnolia tree right by the farm. They would hear us in it. They couldn't see us, but they knew we were there. And then when the war was over, I had some years that were difficult for me at that age, about 10 or 12, I don't know. My dad had to come back and find work again with Pepsi-Cola Corporate. that sat us move a number of times, and to have to leave the safety, excuse me, the safety and familiarity of that place was a joke. But after Houston and several other places, we wound up in Wilmington, where his job took him. So I went through high school and college there, and I met my husband there and married, and then worked while he finished at West Virginia University. And then I just was not going to be anything but a wife and a mom and volunteer where I could. But everywhere I went, I was looking for the stories.
Yeah.
So that kind of brought me up to when we came back to Raleigh.
So your dad's work is what got you into North Carolina
Yes. Mhm.
in Wilmington. Okay.
That was a good place to be in the 50s. The school system was very good, and the whole atmosphere, you behaved in the school, the language in the hall didn't was good. You just didn't do those things. So it was almost idyllic. And the beach nearby, and Hurricane Hazel came through in 1954 when I was a junior, and that was a big deal.
Yeah, I
Everybody.
bet. I bet. So you got married while you were in Wilmington,
Yes.
and then what got you to the Raleigh area?
Work. My husband was in banking with
Okay.
South Carolina National Bank. And in my marriage, we lived in Charlotte and then in the Low Country. That had a big effect with food, the Low Country food, and again, historical things, the homes there. And I would take my little boy, my first child, down, he was about 6 then, down to Fort Moultrie on Sullivan's Island, and you could just run and play and all the embankments and all that.
Yeah.
So all of that was in our background too. We just couldn't seem to escape that period of history, and everybody, he was fascinated by it. So we came back to Raleigh, and that's when the real challenge came to me. And I would tell you about that if I started through my spiritual walk, I guess.
Yeah. Okay.
My spiritual walk began more with a religious education in a way, in the family, in the schools. We could have that in schools.
Hmm.
In this little town, 7 miles from Athens, where the farm was, is where I went to elementary school. And we went back and forth. We were really under the shadow of that university. But this lady from the Bible Society used to come, and as Bill mentioned Sunday, bring these flannel boards and tell stories. And we just thought that was magic because we were before television. So that was an influence in Sunday school, where you had to say a sentence prayer and then a Bible verse, and somebody would always get your Bible verse before they got to you. So that Sunday school with your pennies and all that. And I was baptized when I was 16 because we had settled in, and it was a decision, a real decision. My sister,
Hmm.
who's 20 months younger than I, and we were just joined at the hip, were baptized together. And I remember seeing her come up, and as young as I was, and as little experiences I'd had with spirituality, I
Hmm.
thought I saw a glow around her. It was sweet.
Yeah.
So all through my marriage, I married a Methodist and was active in, when you join a committee there, you're going to join the Council on Ministries. One committee is going to give you 3 more meetings. So I taught uh, preschoolers, and in fact, I taught preschoolers when my son was about 3, and everywhere we moved, I taught 4-year-olds, 3 or 4-year-olds.
Okay.
And that's really kind of what brought me to Wake Forest Baptist Church. After we built our house in Ravenwood and Susan had gone to kindergarten, I contacted Beth McLeod and Suzanne Erskine to see if they had an opening in their We Care. And they didn't, but they wanted to start a 2-year-old class. I didn't want to do 2-year-olds because I think they need to be at home until they're 3. But I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. And it turned out to be the best thing. I had a helping mother, and they, came up just right, measured up to all the little sinners and things. So I was a Methodist, and then there was the real big deal in my life. I'd had a happy marriage, a man that loved his children, was intelligent and nicely educated, was good with art, and funny, loved sports. We really were fine, except that his family had hereditary disease took over, and that was alcoholism, and the marriage could not go on. That had a big impact on the way I prayed, because I had been in so many Bible studies and so many classes and courses on all of these spiritual things, but I still didn't have a really deep need. So, kept trying to manage myself. And I did go into an organization for families of alcoholics. The 12 steps, to me, make anybody's life very, very much simpler and more focused on God and his will for us. So I had been praying so hard for things to get better and not to lose this marriage, but I did not get any answers to my prayers. I was standing on the playground one day with a teacher who had been to Belk's and wanted some needlepoint for her dining room chairs, and she had prayed about it, she said, and there they were. And I'm sitting there thinking, I have prayed and prayed, and I don't get that answer like you did with your, I didn't say anything, but it was stunning to me. Yeah. However, the 11th step focused me better. It's pray only for the knowledge of God's will for you and the power to carry that out. And at that period of time, and a lot of times lately, especially in aging, that way of marrying that to my religious training. We had Bible in high school back in the day, 3 years. The Ministerial Association paid a minister. They were women. And 9th, 10th, 11th grade, I had 3 years of Bible and Bible club and all that. All of those things just hadn't really come together, like when you fall on your knees and you say, I can't do anything about this. And that organization also teaches you it's not your fault. You can't do anything about it. So you learn ways to protect your own territory and not enable and not try to please everybody all the time. So it was complicated, but I did come into Wake Forest after that and worked at the elementary school. That's where I made such good friends. And Susan was about 5th grade. My older son had gone into college 1 year and into the Navy, which was a good thing. On the side of bad things, the other side, there's a good thing. So when you look at it in retrospect, you can see that. At the time, it's not very evident that this is God's will. However, she wanted to come to Wake Forest Baptist because Ruth and Hope Spencer, Amy Vermillion, Valerie Holbert, Paul Leary, and all the people in her class went to church there. And so that was when we changed. I was a watch care member for a long time because I just wasn't ready to be a Baptist. The controversy was in full bloom. I went to work.
What year was this?
I went to work at the seminary in 1985. I had to work seriously then. And Dr. Lawley, I think, resigned in 87. So Dr. Jean McLeod needed an administrative assistant, and I needed a better situation than what I was doing. I hadn't worked in years. When I gave him my resume, I had to do a small font with about 18 years teaching preschool and Mother's Morning Out director and stuff like that. But I did have a background in some academic settings that could help him. And that was just wonderful. He's a great man, wonderful man, very fastidious and precise. But that was good training too. Bernice Ashcraft, the wife of the dean, who was deposed along with Dr. Lolly, worked in the library with us and was a fabulous person. My friends and those people knew that I did not have a happy situation going on. And when you're in those periods, you don't know what the end's going to be. But they never pressed me. They never questioned me. They never made me feel that it was a sin or judgmental. They were just absolutely stand up people, stand up right by me.
Yeah.
So those really were, it was a good and bad, the good and the bad all the way. I got to audit some courses while I was at the seminary, worked there, retired when I was 75 after 26 years. But at one time we could take an hour out, and I had some systematic theology that kind of brought all my thinking together. And I like the early church fathers. That was another one, because that's a period in Christian history that doesn't get much attention at church or anywhere. And then I think I had an ethics and I think the arts, faith and the arts that dealt with music in the church. And that's one of the reasons I like Wake Forest Baptist Church, because of the traditional music, because I like classical music from the Romantic period. I love the composers of those periods. And Janine Skinner is absolutely fabulous.
Oh, yeah.
That's the heart, a lot of times, of my worship. I just got to tell you, she went to Furman with one of my nieces and played at her wedding, and I didn't know her until I put it all together, meeting her here. That's another good thing about aging. You get to put some pieces together again.
Right.
So anyway, it's been good. It's been very good.
So you spent 26 years at the seminary.
In the library, and we went through all of the problems with academic freedom and accrediting agencies. And not being a Baptist, I wasn't as hurt as everybody else. I waited about 2 years, and then I went from watch care into regular membership at Wake Forest Baptist. I've never wanted to leave. It's wonderful. It's real worship to me. The building, the format, it's just, it is a sanctuary. And I met Becky Leary at a preschool reception before I started teaching those 2-year-olds. And of course, when we talked, she had a neighbor in Burg Hall that was my neighbor in Columbia. So Becky and I have been friends. She's been a wonderful friend. 2 other friends that were good in that period was Susan Brinkley, who got me into some historical preservation things at the museum, and Peggy Allen, the editor of the newspaper, was my neighbor. I was very, very lucky. God just seemed to be taking me where I guess he wanted me to be. So I've had a lot of time to volunteer after Susan. It was a miracle. I don't know financially. It was so bad financially how we did it. If you put it down on paper, it wouldn't have worked out. But this is the thing. Great is thy faithfulness. If you ask me about my life, I could tell you that hymn is my life.
Oh, wow.
And just inch at a time, both of them were educated and through different ways, and are just great adults now with careers and travel that I would never have dreamed they could have. But I had time then. Kiwanis was chartered in 1987, and I've been a member of that. They do things for the benefit of children. And then Susan Brinkley found out that I had been a docent at the Mordecai House in Raleigh, where I really did enjoy learning more history of Raleigh. They train you for about 2 weeks before you can do this. When I first came back to Raleigh, and styles of architecture, styles of furniture, history of Raleigh, history of that family. Very, very intriguing. So she knew I had done that, and I didn't know that. I thought the Wake Forest Birthplace Society was kind of an esoteric thing I didn't qualify to join, but they needed help. And so that was what Wake Forest was like with 4,000 people. We all helped each other. And that opened the doors for being on the board at the birthplace and later helping get the Historical Association generally in town started at the museum. And I've served a couple of, in 2002, a couple of terms of Historic Preservation Commission with the town. And then again in the last 2 or 3, I've served about 6 to 9 years, I don't know. But that is good because it kept my education going with Preservation North Carolina training classes. And we did used to go to some wonderful places for a weekend preservation conference, but that had to turn to Zoom, and they went into these training sessions where we look and then have to send in a summary. But it's kept my mind going. That's what I just got to have that. I've had the best life, Joe. I really have. It's good, and I think it's going to be good another few years.
It seems like, as I listen to you tell about your journey here, history and education really stand out as two things that, have really been kind of core pieces of your life, haven't they?
They have been, and stories. I didn't see history as a bad thing to have to study. It was part of what I had been hearing for years, and then I loved it when I got into college with European history and all that. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about when we wrote the history of our church.
Yeah, that, God, what a wonderful book. Kathy and I read it back in December of this past year. I think we had gotten the book, wasn't it back in the fall of
They came
2020?
in November 2019, and then COVID hit us.
2019, okay.
Mm-hmm.
And Kathy and I, read the Wake Forest Baptist Church history, and then our home church is Edenton Baptist Church, which is about 20 years older, and they had just recently written a history. So we went in, they had a lot of the same people, Thomas Meredith. I mean,
Yes.
so it was interesting to read one right after the other. But yeah, so tell us a little bit about the genesis of this history book, and tell us a little bit about that.
It was a long process, and I think Shirley Wooten had wanted a history for as long as she'd been here, since about 1946. And Mrs. Binkley had put together some things, and so had Shirley, but no formal, really good history had been written. And then we saw the one that First Baptist Raleigh had in the last couple of years, and Mercer University Press published theirs. So the history committee had been founded way back with Shirley and Susan Brinkley, but we had an ad hoc committee of 5 people that were to work, and we did for about 4 or 5 years. There was an anonymous donor. We didn't know who it was. And Doug Smith became chairman. He'd come to Wake Forest from Michigan with a deep interest in our history. And then Jean Fisher is such a meticulous, good reader and can just see the construction of everything over. She's a very meticulous reader. And Janice Ishikawa came a little later, and she had some computer skills and communication skills that we didn't have. Joanne did. Joanne Stansel kept us in on the track financially, and with how big to make this thing. There were so many preliminary decisions that you had to say, everybody kept saying, we want it to be done right. Well, what does that mean? And to me, I received theses and dissertations in the library for binding and had to go through them to see that the form, construction, and all that, and didn't do anything with content. But I did know from the Chicago Manual of Style how it ought to be set out. So that was the decision. But then we needed an author, and we didn't. And Dr. Sean Price was at our church at that time, and he had come through 2 masters in ethics and theology at Southeastern, an English literature degree from Central, and then a PhD degree from King's College in Aberdeen, Scotland. They are now missionaries in Cardiff, Wales. But Sean was hired with this money from a donor, generous donor. And we didn't know, and we made a lot of decisions about what to do, what tone to have. So we had to be sure that things were vetted, names, spell check hadn't double crossed us in something,
Right.
and just a lot of things. So this committee worked hard, and we didn't know the donor until we started to talk about pictures. And we hadn't really gone very far with Mercer. We were still waiting for it to be finished and a copy edit of it. That was another thing. So Sean accepted it, and Sean has just done a wonderful job, I think, telling the story. It's like he's got a lot of narrative that brings in some human things, the humanity of these people and what they were trying to do. So we had to decide about how much money to spend on pictures. And then we knew Hallie Arrington Hearn was the donor. And we know that from the preface in the book, but we didn't know it and we didn't talk about it. She didn't want us to. She wanted a committee, when she and Joanne first talked about it, as I understand it, that didn't know she was the donor, so we would be free to do this without knowing that we needed to please her. And it was a wonderful committee, the good exchange of ideas and no dissension. Everybody had something to bring to the table over and over. I wouldn't take anything for that. But I tell you what, I think I've got a couple of things here I wanted to tell you about. And whoever's listening, go to the book and turn to page 72. And that's one of the best stories in the book about Washington Manley Wingate, who was president of the college through the Civil War. I'd seen a picture of him in the museum with dark hair and a very severe face. He was a South Carolinian, a product of Furman and Southern Seminary. But when I read Sean's description, he was tall, over 6 feet. He did have black hair and black eyes, but he's one of the most genial people anybody could ever find. One of them said he was a charming conversationalist and held the chief place in every social circle. His manner was easy and natural, and he could adapt himself to any degree of human intelligence. In other words, he went downtown and he could talk to people there, and he held his own preaching, a very good preacher. And you just need to read about the challenges he had, unfortunately dying at age 50 with heart disease. And that's covered. It's very poignant. The second thing would be page 101 with Richard Tillman Van, who came from Hertford County, and his mother died at 5. His father died. He was raised by his cousin, whose husband was a minister. And when he was a boy, he lost his arms in a sorghum mill. I don't know if you got that far in reading. So he lost one above the elbow and one below. So read that and find out. I want people to read that and find out how he managed to write and overcome that and become one of the best known and best preachers in North Carolina. And then the last one would be Doug's favorite. He worked so hard on the chapter about the building of the church, and he really loves Walter Nathan Johnson, who came, and he was the first that wasn't the president of the seminary. He worked under two the pressure of raising money for the church all over the state, the pressure of having it finished and pleasing everybody, and getting it done. And then he had this that I found interesting. He said when he started to preach, he looked out and he saw all these learned professors, and he became so intimidated that he really was having a trouble writing a sermon or preaching a sermon, until he felt God tell him, stop that, preach your sermon, and don't try to be anybody else. And isn't that what we all need to do?
Mm-hmm.
Like telling my story today is not somebody else's, but it's mine. And so Doug really liked that. And by the way, the architecture of our church, there were about 18 of them done by an architect in North Carolina, in Edenton is the style of architecture. Down in South Carolina, I know of two or three. Athens, Georgia, where I was, this domed,
Hmm.
still a cruciform kind of architecture, but it was an interesting process. And I want you to look in there and see what happened to him after all this pressure.
Yeah.
It's really such a human story. If anyone thinks that this book is too dry to read, I would encourage you to give it a shot. Not all the way through at one time. It's the thing you pick up, put down. And of course, Hallie is a direct descendant of Samuel Waite. And
Hmm.
she grew up in the church. We bet each all kind of represented a different era in the history of the church. But then we had such cooperation from Doug Leary and Dr. Braswell and people who were key in so many controversies, either
Hmm.
racial, denominational, whatever they happen to be. And the good thinking and intelligence that our congregation has exhibited and come out on the top side of so many issues that could have broken us up completely. But those people vetted the book too.
Yeah.
We went and we had to change some names and not put with the Stevenson Center lawsuit because they were still alive. We called them the plaintiff. So there were those kind of duties as we did it. I know I'm going on too long about it, but we are so proud of it. And
Yeah.
pride, hubris, but still, because Mercer did agree to do it, and that was another ball game. We were stunned and hurt that we couldn't get. We had COVID because we wanted Sean to come back, have a big deal, and celebrate these books and sell them.
Yeah.
We had 500, but the Heritage Foundation, arm of our church, or some men in our church, made it possible for it to be published at Mercer with a grant. And we are so wanting, they're not pressing us, but we would very much like to sell the books so that money could go back into their endowment, I suppose.
Yeah.
We'll have to see how that works out. Um,
Well, I tell you, just listen to tell, remind me about those stories. And again, we've read it, and gosh, it just makes me want to go back and read them again. Anybody listening to this, who has any connection with Wake Forest Baptist Church or Baptist history in general, or the history of North Carolina, it's incredible some of the stories that are in the book. So yeah, I would tell anybody listening to this they need to get a book. Beverly, what is the way somebody would go about getting a book? Would they just get it through the church office or?
yes, we did some other routines through
Yeah.
uh, the hardest COVID time, but the museum, Wake Forest Historical Museum and the
Okay.
Calvin Jones House, Ed Morris has been so gracious, and we can sell them there without him taking a cut. We may branch out and have to try some other measures to sell it, but for now, we wanted it more or less in our control without any discounts to anybody else. But yeah, that's how they can get it. And interestingly enough, we've sold a lot to citizens in the town, local historians, and to academic libraries that
Mm.
came through. We sent out a lot of notices and would have liked to have had more, but still, it's being noticed. And eh, well, it's a thing for the ages. It's things for new members of our church and an investment in giving our church the distinction that it earned. Now, in the appendix, we had a lot of information about early Baptists that we thought might bore everybody up in the front part. He, Sean had to tell those things because we didn't just plunk down here. There was a movement with Thomas
Right.
Meredith and the others that brought everybody, brought it all to fruition.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting journey.
Yeah. That is awesome. Well, thank you for, your leadership in this and the work you put into it because telling our stories and getting that history preserved is one of the ways we leave a lasting legacy, right? I mean,
Exactly.
it's amazing. And if you're listening to this, don't be afraid to buy some extra copies for your kids who maybe would have no interest in reading it today, but 30 years from now will consider it a priceless treasure. And so, yeah, preserving the history and the stories is really something. And that book is just fantastic. So,
Thank you, Joe.
yeah, thanks for all your work and for the committee as well.
We did
Well,
want to please. Thank you so much.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, we're talking a little bit about, that's a big project you've been involved in recently. What are some of the other things that you're involved in here at the church currently?
Not so much at the church. I have at one point in my life learned to accept only those things that I wanted most to do,
Hmm.
unless it was something critical. So I've been on the library committee, the history committee. I've taught adult Sunday school and Koinonia. I've
Hmm.
been chairman of the Koinonia Foundation and a member of the board, along with Doug Leary and some others in the past. And recently, let's see, with the church, of course, interest in the preschool way back, child development and that kind of thing. That was another passion. Uh, but I don't get too deeply involved in some of the logistics, some of the
Yeah,
quote programs. I just try to and learn to do this really kind of at the seminary, guard my own focus in my heart, in my soul, and not be distracted too much by denominational troubles.
yeah, yeah. How about just as we're talking a little bit about present day, um, do you have any types of practices, routines, things that you do that you find that have been helpful that you might want to share with others that you currently, find that are helpful to you in your spiritual walk?
Well, it's very different now at this age than when I was in my 30s. I joined a group called Women of the Book in Columbia. It was a citywide Bible study. I began to, and I in that period I would get up before everybody else and do Bible reading. I've read it through, having studied it in school, and then reading the books that I missed in school, um, and other ways. That was part of it for a long time, and just quiet prayer. But then when I entered that desperate phase, I feel like somebody else has said this, I think he's with me all the time. And my thoughts are there so much that I have to ask myself, am I focusing and devoting purposefully um, on a morning reading? I've read Barbara Brown Taylor's books that I adore, and so many helps that we have um, through literature and all of that. But for me now, um, I love the campus. I have to go find something peaceful. And then to just go back to that hymn. I have been taken through lots of hard times, but some wonderful times. And I think God knew so much better than I did what I was praying for. So now old age is the specter hanging over my head. I think that's a word. But I think now I just do such a variety of things. I don't, right now, I don't make it a strict routine. I like to just do what I need at the moment. And that might be Psalms. And I love Ecclesiastes. I like James. I like Hebrews. There's so much, there's so many places I like to
Right,
find myself.
right, right. Sunday morning, Kathy and I usually get to church a little bit early, and I find it's helpful to get there early and settle. And I looked over, and of course, there you were at 5 after 9. You were there about 20, 25 minutes early as well, and you are so faithful, and you're there all the time, and I just appreciate that about what you do, and it's always good to see you there on Sunday morning.
There's so many people that I know there and look around that are magnificent people. um, doing great things in the garden and with technology. And so I have a great deal of admiration and respect for other people.
Yeah, yeah. Beverly, is there anything that I should be asking you that I haven't asked you?
No, I don't think so. I think you've been very patient with too much talk, perhaps, about some of my passions. And one of the things I've done, not at church, but been so significant for me, the Ailey Young House is a Reconstruction period African American home that's next to the town cemetery, neglected for so long. And through a long process, and I'm on a committee through the Historic Preservation Commission, it's been stabilized and brought back to how it looked. And there was a black school here, a boarding school, the Allen family, the college professors helped the black community, but it will be open to the public. We got to paint it. We got a big grant from the state, but it's a unique. There's so much emphasis now on African American history, how they lost through urban renewal their communities and place. So we have that a community here in our town that is becoming very vibrant and working with Diane Laws and Roger Shackelford, two African Americans my age, and then the planning office people who know what they're doing. I just love that I could see through black people's eyes a little bit better.
Hmm.
And they don't, and they didn't make me feel too white. I just always regretted that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and they were just wonderful. I wouldn't take anything from the book committee and the Alien committee. And that was spiritual growth, honestly. Both
Right,
are. You can find it wherever you are.
right.
It's just beautiful when you see it in a very secular place. I think
Well,
it's
we always talk about seeing where God's at work in the world, and a lot of times it's in those places, right?
exactly, and you don't have to hand out tracts.
Right, right.
Uh, it is, I think, I know we do need to speak of it, and I think we know when it's the right time to speak to somebody. You can tell in their eyes or something they say that made
Yeah.
me want to say, I found out this. Um, I like that approach, but and then the African American cemetery out at Friendship Chapel Baptist Church, we've tried to save and have successfully done so from encroaching development. Slaves worshipped in an arbor, and their graves there with gravestones, and they got Ammons grant to help refurbish that, and that'll be something people can go and see. But the way they are developing the behind there, Franklin Street, and all of that extension, they have mowed everything down, but developers had changed hands. But we did get that saved. So Friendship Baptist Church worked really hard. The older people in Friendship, Dr. Hollowell, Hollowell, I think,
Holloway.
uh, Holloway. Um, I know him so well, but yeah, that's been a good partnership too. And I'm looking forward to September 2nd when I think there's a conversation among people out at the Stevenson Center, people of different races and faiths, I think. That's been an hour. Wow.
You have been so involved in the community.
It's
I
been
mean,
so interesting though.
you are just involved in so much of the community. I mean, it's very inspiring to see that, you have such a love for that, and that's something we all need to learn from. Well, two questions I'm going to ask you as we wrap up. One is, what do you do for fun?
Oh my goodness. I like to play cards with Becky Leary. And, when we worked at the elementary school, we started a covered dish bridge game, two tables, and we still are together after almost 40 years. So we've come and gone. A lot of them have died, and actually we're down to about five. That's one of the things about aging. But we laugh so much. I want to do anything that we laugh. And my family, my in-law family, just love to laugh, tell stories. But then I go to Rex Wellness for range of motion and the warm
Oh,
pool. I've had 5 back surgeries early in the 2000s with debris that had to get moved out of my spinal column and affected a leg that causes me to have a dropped foot. So that kind of therapy is fun. And when I retired, my children gave me, at my request, an adult tricycle. And I had it for about 4 or 5 years and loved riding up and down North Main around the campus. But it got too heavy and I moved out to Crossings. I got to say something about Jim Adams, really. Jim developed the commissary of the mill, and it's on the National Register of Historic Places. And that it was rent control because of the preservation tax credit. But it was a gift to me. I told him if he ever thought he'd not done anything to anybody, he gave me an affordable place to live, and it is beautiful inside with high ceilings. Unfortunately, they've sold those to individuals, so I'm at Crossings at Heritage, and I don't really do a lot of the old folks stuff too much. I try to get back and do my usual thing. Now, when I can't drive, I might have to do the old folks stuff.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, last question I want to ask you or ask you is there anything that we can pray for you about?
I think nothing, not the usual things you would think about. Of course, I cherish my health and my mind and that I can drive. But I think I would want prayer to live in the moment, to keep my head and my heart and the Holy Spirit all in one place, and to be able to move on through whatever the final stages are going to be. I would want prayers for that. That's what I pray for.
Yeah.
And I love it when other people pray for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, listen, what a rich life, and it's been really a privilege to listen to your story here, and I'm sure there's a lot more to it than we've heard this morning, but thank you for opening up and letting us get to know you a little bit, and know that we will pray for you going forward, and know that you're inspiring to me
Oh,
just in terms of all that you continue to do.
I've been a lucky, lucky person. Peggy Allen and Susan and all the people that welcomed me to Temple, and Willard Brown was our pastor. Sweetest prayers. It's been a wonderful place to be. Thank you, Joe.
You bet, Beverly. Thank you.